ready to go.
Hello and welcome to Access Chat. It's taken us a long time to get here, but we've finally got Matt May, who is the uh, head of inclusive design, or is it inclusive design lead for Adobe? So
Yeah, inclusive design.
delighted, yeah, delighted to have you here. It's been too long to get you on. Can you tell us a little bit about, what you're doing and where you sit in the sort of Adobe ecosystem?
Yeah, so I started in Adobe Accessibility, so I spent the first 10 years over there, and now I live in Adobe Design, which is a part of the Creative Cloud organization, and oversees our design system spectrum. Basically assigns our designers to different product teams to build out our products. So completely different perspective on all of what I've done so far this career.
Excellent. And I know that you've been putting out some really nice materials on Tinternet recently, some nice sort of tutorials and also sort of some webinars on inclusive design, some really good quality stuff. So how does that come about, and what goes into it? Because, well, I know that a lot goes into it, but what are the sort of things that you're doing, and how you sort of building up that sort of capability within Adobe and for your customers, obviously, because it's enabling customers to create accessible content.
Yeah, so for what we've been doing so far, it's been we've been working from more or less the beginning. How can we make sure that designers are capable, understand what needs to go into a product for it to be inclusive? And so when I moved over at the end of 2017, probably the first year or so was mostly managing the basics. How do we add alt text or labels or set reading order or things like that? But understanding kind of where our designers are and where their teams are, just how that transaction works. So from there, we identified some of the things that our designers needed to learn, to pick up, to make a part of their practice. And so we worked with Judith Treviranus at OCAD University, and a host of other experts in different aspects of inclusive design, and built a day-long training for all of our designers. And from last April to this January, which is perfect timing, I was traveling the world. I'm glad I'm not doing this anymore, but we literally went to 9 different sites at Adobe and gave this workshop to every designer that works in the organization, which is over 300. And as we were developing this, we kind of realized that this is something that belongs out in the world. And so we built the Adobe Inclusive Design Workshop, workbooks, basically 3 modules that cover some of the theory behind inclusive design, aspects of it that are not related to disability, because I think a lot of people think inclusive design is just accessibility from the design perspective. It's much more wide encompassing than that. And so we break down other kinds of exclusive practices and how we got there, and try to make it an entire, just an entire unlearning for all of our people. And as part of our new hire curriculum. So did a lot of training over over a year or two. And as those teams as it starts to percolate through our teams of designers, they start to think of what they're doing that is fostering that exclusivity, or things that they could do that will make things more inclusive. And then we can start to have a conversation as peers. Here's what we want to do. What are the things we need to think about? And then it becomes more of a consultative process, and people are starting to become experts of their own just by doing this work, by working with our inclusive researcher, Molly Bloom, you know, that we're learning so much about this process by sort of being explicit that this and being intentional about the work that we're doing. So it's been an interesting ride. We're only really just what you're seeing out in the world of our products is just the beginning of the kinds of work that we're doing over the next several years.
Hey Matt, can we go back a little bit, because you are I consider you a staple in our industry. You've been a leader for many years, and so do you mind telling the audience a little bit about your personal journey of how you got here, but also do you mind also talking a little bit about the history of how Adobe got here? Because I know that early on, I moved into the field around 2001. I came in the field in 2001. And I remember hearing things like, oh, it's too hard to make a table accessible. Don't use tables, and don't use PDFs because we can't make PDFs accessible. And and there was so much that we were just supposed to stop using. And I remember at the time I was talking to somebody that used to work at Adobe, Greg, and he was telling me just the sheer numbers of PDFs that were just in the United States government. And so there was at the beginning, there was some hysteria from the community. And it was very interesting to watch how Adobe navigated that. And then, of course, you came together and you merged with some others that were doing stuff. But I just think y'all have a very interesting history personally and in the company. So I was wondering if you could just talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, so specific to, I'll cover the Adobe thing first. The first release of tagged PDF was I think Acrobat 5 in 99, 2000, something like that. So the Acrobat team has been working at this for a really, 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 really long time. More than by far the majority of software companies that are out there. And part of the story is about the evolution, but I want to say one thing about PDF, which is the brief for the portable document format, right? If you give the elevator pitch for this in the basically early 1990s, it's a picture of a piece of paper. That's it. I mean, we could talk about like PostScript, because like it was PostScript printer codes that turned into something that you could view on a screen. And then it was, if you couldn't do that, you needed to post a picture that's basically a TIFF file that's in a common format. And it's evolved since then, but it was basically 5 years in before there was a way to make that text readable by AT. We've been chasing it ever since. That's probably the biggest lesson that we can get from PDF is, if you have an idea that's going to be that central to communication, you need to have the answer for how am I going to make this broadly accessible? Because, take it from us, trying to claw that back, trying to get the genie back into the bottle is, that's an immense amount of work. And, I think that, and that's also kind of, I think, the frustration with a lot of people as far as PDF goes, because yes, we've created the tagging support, and we've gradually made it easier and easier to do. And Microsoft, for their part, not just our plugin for Office, but their plugin is getting better at doing doing that tagging. And but the core problem is that we have by default there won't be that accessibility information, and then and so you have all of these broken PDFs, and it is kind of like navigating like a walkway with a bunch of broken glass on it. Like, you just don't want to walk that walkway anymore if you've been cut, right? So it's understandable to be frustrated that if you're used to PDF documents being inaccessible, that you just don't want to trust the format. And what that kind of requires is work for us to essentially boil the ocean, right? And so if you look at some of the things that we're doing right now that are focused on the PDF ecosystem, like we just released the liquid mode in Acrobat. And that's basically taking any PDF in the wild and running it through Sensei, our machine learning system, and determining all the things that we have been trying to get people to, people to add in tagged PDF, like reading order, so ordering columns, marking headings, marking tables, all of those kinds of features. But the benefit of that is that you don't, you can be less afraid of that PDF being an absolute barrier, because it's going to now start to adapt. It's going to start to be readable, even if it wasn't originally OCR'd, that it will be in the right order, that you'll be able to fill in forms and all of that. So I think that I guess is the allegory for why we are how we've evolved in Adobe. Because if we had a design core 20 years ago, and let's remember where accessibility was 20 years ago, that we just don't have the tooling that we have today. But if we had thought about this and somebody had been in the room and said, if you're blind, or you have low vision, or you need to have this content read out to you due to dyslexia, how are you going to do that? We would have had a fundamentally different approach to doing that would have leaned a lot heavier on the structure of that document than the presentation. And I think we're still cleaning up for that, but I think we would, that I think to me is the story of why inclusive design is important.
So Matt, you were telling us before about the workshops that you were doing before, and the way how you train people and bring inclusive design to Adobe. But I'm particularly interested then how when having so many people interested, how do you unfold innovation? How do you find a space where, I have an idea here, we can do this. How can you structure that within Adobe to make sure that good ideas come into the table?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And, we still have this kind of feeling that we're all a bunch of little startups, just because we're now kind of more and more a conglomerate of other companies. But we also have processes that we share in common. And so we have the ability to kind of look in at what other products are doing. So we have a number of things that I can't quite talk about yet, but that when when they see the light of day, as we are in Seattle right now, it's just turning light now. It's 7:30 in the morning, so if I'm incoherent, this is why. We are working on, we will see somebody that's working on a product, and then we can start peppering them with questions about, have you thought about this? What are you going to do with that? And and rather than say kind of go away, we're working on this and we'll get to that later. We know that doesn't work. That we are, the processes are basically encapsulating that kind of, how are you going to do this in an inclusive way, and not just kind of in terms of the functional accessibility of it, but how are you going to make this, how is it going to reach the users that we want it to reach, and not just the ones that can afford it or are the nearest to us in proximity, or economic status, or if we treated the universe of our users like it was everybody that lived within a couple of kilometers of our main offices, it would be a lot richer, a lot whiter, than the world's population. And that's another aspect of inclusion that we need to think about, that how do we solicit the feedback of people so that our user base looks like the way that we want it to look, and not just the people that are going to be the ones knocking at the door with a fistful of cash in hand.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I'm doing some work both inside my organization and outside, and people were trying to sort of go, well, how do we define what we want from diversity? And at a simple boiled down level, you want it to reflect the population of the world at large. So it's got to include and reflect the population of the world at large. And within tech companies, within our bubble of whiteness and privilege and all of that kind of stuff, we're not very reflective. So I think that we do need to have some kind of conscious process to be able to bring that in. And I think that one of the reasons why we all landed up here and landed up on Twitter was partly as a result of wanting to sort of suck in that knowledge and join that community together. We're as a community, you know, usually we've got some kind of reason for investing in it other than being rich and white and privileged and all of the rest of it. So, you know, I've got ADHD, Debra has ADHD and dyslexia from my point of view. I believe, yeah. So there's three out of four ain't bad, yeah, right? Okay, so you know, did the fact that you have ADHD play a role in you coming into the community, or was that just incidental?
Yeah. By the way, thanks, Antonio, for playing along. I mean, I know what it's like just being in a room with us. So yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of funny because I really just had to like almost retcon my own history. I had to reconstitute how I got here, because actually the first inclusion story that I remember was that I was taught I was taught Braille in second grade, and I mean, the funny thing is, like, you go like, oh, that must have been a really progressive school. And the reality is that it was a school that kicked me out because I was disruptive. You know, like I was, so like basically, in order, like for being punished for the fact that I was not fitting into the classroom environment, they would send me into the special education room. And we had one blind student in school who I actually ended up meeting like out on the, you know, like out in the world at an accessibility conference, you know, some years later. And so yeah, my punishment for my disability was to basically be support for somebody else's disability. So you know, fast forward a little bit in that story, it was just, you know, now that I'm kind of realizing that there are just basically I've really grooved my career to the things that I'm strongest at, right? The idea of being in front of people, giving talks, formulating thoughts and organizing them, and then basically being under enough pressure that you can't just kind of like, you can't just space out in the middle of a presentation, right? It doesn't work that way. They don't invite you back on if you can't give a talk. So the strengths that I have in hyper-focusing on that specific thing are what gets me through doing these kinds of workshops, because things don't really go the way that you want. You need to have kind of some neuroplasticity, some flexibility in changing things around on the fly. And that really caters to all of our strengths. What I hadn't really pieced together was that a lot of the things that I do, like stacks of Post-it notes, if we could turn the camera around, they'd just be like a beautiful mind, you know. It's just it's always sunny in Philadelphia, like conspiracy like scene. Those, like, that's part of my AT, you know, creating like creating the structure that my brain tends to lack, and remembering what my assignments are and what the things are that are most important to me. I've got my books, but also, like, there are things now that I need in our applications to keep me on task, right? And so now I'm thinking about these things in terms of design for me. I think a lot of advocates are actually come at this from the other side, right? They're thinking about, inclusion is the status quo plus me, right? That I need to, that these are the things that I need in order to participate. And then from there, there's this, it's anchoring to yourself in that process. And that's what a stakeholder is, right? People that are able to advocate for their themselves or their specific group or identity. And my background, I started because I was working at an online grocery store, and a blind user explained that, by making that directly accessible to them, that I could turn their, 4-hour, ordeal having to call the store, wait for the access shuttle, go pick things up and take them and put them home, into a 15-minute thing. Right. That was an opportunity. It was a technical opportunity to change somebody's life for the better. All of those roles are valid. I'm not saying don't be an advocate for yourself, but understand that inclusion is about everybody's needs being together. I just think about this as it's liberal, progressive politics versus conservative politics, that when conservatives are in place, it's just kind of let's just stick to the way things are. And when progressives are in, it's let's change everything but my thing first. We can't make progress unless we are not just self-advocates, but advocates for one another. And that's kind of the, my impetus for aligning under the idea, at least, of inclusive design.
No, I think that's a great answer. I think what's also really interesting is quite how many neurodivergent people have a very similar view, and have spent a lot of time actually advocating for lots of disability groups other than themselves. Because actually an area that's quite underserved is the whole sort of area of cognitive accessibility and design for attention and all of this stuff, or design for inattention and designed to divert your attention to where all of these sort of dark patterns that are really quite problematic have been done for the sort of wrong reasons. So I think
every website that has a TV news site that has a pre-roll video screen that's sitting there in the corner, I want to shoot those designers into the sun. The words might as well just disappear. I recognize that those are characters, and that characters with spaces between them form words and thought. But when this thing is going here, there's no way that I'm actually going to consume that information. And it's just extremely frustrating to, and from that perspective, we have it pretty well off, right? If you think about some of the experiences that the users have, if you're deaf or hard of hearing and there's no captions on that on the video, if you're blind and this is all encoded in an image, that's another thing. But I think that one of the reasons that a lot of neurodiverse people are into this, a lot of people of color, a lot of women and gender nonconforming people, a lot of LGBTQ people are advocates in this space, is that they don't need to be explained to what exclusion is. That when when this happens to you, you understand what it's like and what you feel like. And in our sense, it's the concept of neurodiversity is as an umbrella term for a whole number of things that in the medical model are disorders.
Yes.
We're talking 10 years really that's been a term that's been in use, and it's still not really widely understood what it means. I think the autism community has latched onto it. Otherwise, it's kind of
it's not super well understood. We were really lucky to interview the lady that invented the term fact.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Judy Singer. So the first
Okay.
like referenceable mention of neurodiversity as a concept was in her academic degree piece quite some time ago. And so she's out in Australia, but and yes, I mean it grew out of the sort of it was first adopted within the autism community, largely in the US, and then dyslexia community in the UK and the wider umbrella. And there's still a lot of debate around that. But you're right about the sort of empathy for exclusion, because you know what it's like when you know what it feels like to be excluded, but not all of the time.
Neil, and that actually is part of Julie's argument.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's I mean the idea of being sort of partially excluded, because these things impact us, but not in the same way. That pre-roll video is just like someone having the TV on in the bar. My conversation with the person I'm sat opposite with is just, I'm drawn to this blinking light in the corner, the fool's lantern. Yeah. But at the same time, it's kind of like I most of the time I don't consider I'm part of the disability community. I don't necessarily feel disabled a lot of the time. I have some difficulties, and then there are occasions where something is constructed in such and such a way, or a piece of software is developed in such and such a way where suddenly it just slams back at you, and suddenly I'm disabled by that circumstance.
Yeah, and like the other piece of this is that and this kind of connects to aging. The another thing that I'm rapidly getting familiar with, that so I think of the of a lot of the like the experience of especially like I think about basically 50 plus people and mobile devices. Because I think that if you look into the hands of a lot of people with iPhones, if they're 50 and up, basically we get presbyopia, eyes start to change and lose their sphericality, and so we end up being farsighted. And so you see the phones and like the fonts are blown up so that you can see them from space, right? And that's you're welcome, right? Like that was an accessibility feature that has gradually been poured into easier and easier places to find in the mobile operating systems. But your mental process, basically, if you have this ableist frame, right, that I'm not really disabled, I'm just getting older, right? That's them, right? Like that, and you see the evolution in operating systems from from an accessibility panel to a universal access panel to now it's kind of promoted in iOS to the first row in the settings. So when you start to see these things when you start to see yourself in these things, that's when it starts to click that this isn't one thing that everybody gets to use and then like we hack in a bunch of other stuff in the end. That this is a smorgasbord. You get to pick and choose the things that you like and that you want. If you want, prefers reduced motion, you can do that. If you want to change the colors of the fonts, you can do that. And the way that we got there was by listening to people when they have problems, and and predicting how things were going to go. So these are all arguments that take us back to like, how do we think about this from the start? Because the amount of cleanup work that everybody has had to do in this industry just to get to this place is immense compared to like, what if we had just sort of thought about this stuff from the beginning? How much further would we be along in IT, in in the things that we're using? And the other example of this is video games. And I think it's kind of in like a metaphor for what we could be learning, what we could be doing that would actually move things along. We had the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, CVAA, that required things like if there's chat in room, then it needs to be accessible. That dialogue needs to be captioned. And so all of the major gaming houses have built that support in. All of the modules that are built, all of the code, like shareable code that's built in that industry supports that because they know that they need it. But the result of that, as opposed to like, I guess how things are with Section 508 here, that it's just kind of clear this bar, which didn't really change until the 508 refresh. That the video game companies are like transcending this whole thing, adding filters for low vision, changing the mappings for keyboards. And my friend Bryce from Microsoft led the project that built the Xbox Adaptive Controller, and so now you can remap everything so that it's basically two single switch devices that are right in front of you, and you can play a number of games. The Last of Us 2, which I played recently, has all of these different modes for like finding targets and and collectibles, and 3D sound, so that I've seen Sightless Combat, the blind gamer, beat this game like faster than I did, which I'm honestly like, I'm lucky if I can make it through the game in a 10-hour game in 30 hours, because I'm like going through every niche in there, and he blazes through it in like 6, and I'm like, but that idea of like, how can we do this, like, instead of like, let's just cross this bar and then we can just move on to something else. Fundamentally different way of thinking about this, and I think that's that is the way that we should be thinking about all products, not just software.
I fundamentally agree. I think that the whole gaming industry has been one of the most great stories around accessibility over the last few years. We've had Ian Hamilton and we've had Bryce on as well. So really the rate of progress within accessibility in gaming has been exponential. I guess like you, I'm looking at it with a smidge of jealousy that they're able to move stuff so quickly. In the traditional IT world, we've been rolling the same rock up the same hill for a long time because we've got that much legacy code.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think
that is the nice thing about about that world, I think, is that you have, I mean, you start with essentially nothing. Like, you have a bunch of APIs, but you're not building, you have an open world, but you can kind of swap it out. It's almost like having an operating system on top of the operating system. Everything you do is starting from scratch. And so you really have to think about how you do this in a way that sort of taking things off the shelf doesn't really afford you.
I never really got into the games, playing the games. My kids did, and so many of my friends did. And I it's funny what you were saying, Neil. I'm a little bit jealous that I didn't do that. I was too busy, taking care of my family and running a business and doing these other things. But it seems that, I agree. We've seen so much progress with the gaming industry over the last few years, and what they're doing as we walk as a world to this AI and this really figuring out what we're going to do with this new technology, and how do we make sure technology, works for humans. And it just seems like all of these things are converging. And I wish now that I had, not done the dishes and gone and played it more with my son on his games.
There's still time, Deborah. There's still time.
I don't think
whole new systems that just came out. You got 2 of them. Just get in line. That's great.
Yeah.
That's right. Just get in line. But it's fascinating because at first I thought they were just playing. Remember, I'm older than everybody, but I remember these young people at the time hoping that maybe someday we used to make fun of them, the kids saying, what do you think you can do, grow up and play games? It's not a real career. Oh, that is a real career. So it was like, I remember, because I've been alive long enough, but I'm just fascinated because now we're tying it into these, wherever we're going with artificial intelligence, the VR and the AR and the mixed reality. And I'm just, the pace is so intense and amazing. And it's just, the world's changing so fast. And sometimes, as we all know, it's extremely stressful, especially those of us with ADHD. I remember, I was fascinated with your story of you when you were a kid. And I hear that so often, that people, they don't know what to do with you, so they put you in special ed. And when I was put, I'm not embarrassed by this. Well, when I was put in school in first grade, I didn't go to kindergarten, but I went to first grade, but I was only 5, which in the States, now I think it's 6, but my parents were going through a very violent divorce. And I look at my report card, and I failed the first grade. And my report card said that I just cried in the back of the room because I was being traumatized as a kid. My parents were going at it. They were going at it. So what they did was they just put me in the back of the room and gave up on me. And I remember, I'm sure this never happened to you or Neil. I remember being in elementary school and the teacher saying, one more person says anything or laughs, and I was going to laugh every time.
That was always me.
It's like,
yeah.
And actually, yeah. So this is. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, it's like, yeah, I know that y'all can all identify with that. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah. No, it was the this is one of the things, like I read this book called The Power of Neurodiversity, which I only really want to cite for one thing, which is that whether you were considered gifted or disabled depends largely on when and where you were born. And thinking about the circumstances of my entry into education. When I was 3-4 years old, I was precocious, right? So it was because I was young, I was curious, I was getting into a ton of trouble, and they were like, let's see if we can put this kid into some place where there probably isn't flammable material within reach, and schools are great for that. So I entered kindergarten in another town because I was like over the cusp of when I was allowed to come in. So I graduated on the early side. I was usually the youngest person in my class or nearly, and I dealt with a lot of that problem, like just that I was mentally there, like cognitively at the level of doing this work, but socially not. And and it's really frustrating that you have to kind of fit in with a cohort, and that you have to be aligned in so many different ways for them to say, like, okay, now we're going to be able to teach you.
Yeah, well said. I think that that sense of otherness, especially, I mean, I was late diagnosed, Debra also late diagnosed. So whilst dyslexia runs in the family, it wasn't something that I thought applied to me. I just thought I was somehow failing certain things, or got called a dilettante and daydreamer, and yes, did all of those things, like getting into scrapes, etc. But yeah, I spent 10 years working for a company that specialized in providing solutions to dyslexia, and yeah, whether people were considered gifted or disabled, yeah, really did depend on the socioeconomic background. So we would see very different cohorts of people coming through our doors, depending whether they'd been to state school or private school, which we strangely in the UK call public school.
Always confusing for us, because then you have like public and private sector, and that's the same. And I'm like, I'm working in the private sector, and I'm like, wait, is that the same or different?
Yeah. So where people would be given the tools and the support they needed to flourish, and then on the other side we see people with the same kind of levels of intelligence, same kind of levels of inquisitiveness ending up in the, you know, criminal justice system.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's still an issue, but I think that there is a greater recognition now, and I think that there's a better understanding of the potentiality of people that are not neurotypical.
And I also think, like, just really quickly on that, I think that it's worth people thinking about, like, if there were 100 of me, how many of me would be in jail, you know, like, have a substance abuse problem, like that our, you know, causes and conditions, like the things that cultivate one thing over another matter. And if we all think, like, I mean, there aren't 100 hetero-inclusive design positions. So, like, I'm not, like, if 100 of me got spread out, like, we wouldn't all end up in the same destination. So it's a way to also recognize that how fortunate you are to be in the situation that you're in, because none of it is actually guaranteed. But, you know, there's some other lessons that are in there as well. It's worth thinking about it from that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's actually a great point for us to end our conversation, because we've run out of time. Need to thank our privilege to be supported by Barclays Access, MyClearText, and Microlink, who help us maintain our website, keep ourselves captioned, and keep going. This is pretty much our 6th year now doing this stuff. So I believe Antonio just wanted to say something before we close, so I'll shut up and hand over.
No, I just, there's quite no people that are listening to us, and might be curious. No, we're talking about this topic, but how can I manage my people in my organization to take advantage of all this talent, and not to make sure that they're able to drive and bring their ideas, but at the same time that the other employees who are still not able understanding what they bring are able to merge. How can you do that?
That's a great question, and the short answer for that is, so the workshop has 3 modules. And module 4 is going to be content strategy. That's coming up. Module 5 is going to be inclusive research. And module 6, which we're just in the beginning of, is that like organizational inclusion and equity. Like that, how can we recognize and and give weight to the diversity that's already in the room, so that people are actually able to bring their full selves to work, as our HR department calls it. And then from there, how do we understand who's not in the room, and how can and how can we be more inclusive in the research that we're doing, in the hiring that we're doing, so that that everybody is not just brought in. Like, just having statistics is not the same. What Adobe is working on is something called opportunity parity, that across genders, that it's one thing if let's say we have 50-50 employment in this, and 50-50 pay, or equal pay from everybody. But if all of the men are in senior vice president positions and all of the women are simple directors, or lower, right? You still have a power imbalance, and those power imbalances manifest themselves in different ways in different organizations. But to me, inclusion is a stepping stone to equity, that we should be appreciating people's progress, including their lived experiences in their progression through their careers, and that just getting people into the door is only the first step of that. So in the meantime, understanding how diverse you are, and thinking about the barriers that have been established, and the modes that you may have fallen into that can cause people to feel marginalized when they're expressing their opinions. I think the example of basically a woman saying something in a meeting, being ignored, and then a man saying exactly the same thing, and oh, that's a great idea. It happens all the time, and these are smaller things that you can do that don't require like hiring a new CEO or a new head of HR but that are equally important. It's just a part of a broader practice of, of recognizing that this isn't just about like how we can all get along at work, which means kind of satisfying the loudest person in the room. That we have to recognize that that everybody brings something to the table if you're actually willing to listen to it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt. I'm really looking forward to the conversation on Twitter.
Me too. We'll see how that goes.
It will be fine. What could possibly go wrong?
I love all of you. Just, yeah. If I said anything you don't like, I'm probably not sorry, but I feel for you.
I loved your comments. You did a great job. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.